So as people continue to join, I want to welcome you to the last and third session in our digital engagement virtual training series on social media and specifically Twitter. And while people continue to join, I think we'll move to the next slide so we can start with our intro poll, and I will launch that now while people are joining. The question is, how active are you on Twitter? So we'll give this about a minute while people, I think people are still joining, so we'll give it about a minute to vote before we start our presentation. Okay, we'll give it about 15 more seconds to vote. Excellent, and I'm going to share the results really quickly so we can see it looks pretty even across the board between people feeling that they're novice, absolutely new to Twitter, or all the way to being a social media butterfly. So it'll be nice to hear from all of you and your varying experience during this session. So I think we'll go to the next slide. We have about 28 people, and as people continue to join, we'll just welcome them in. So today's session will be presented to you by myself, Aubrey Weber, Tori LeBrun, Kelly Smith, and Corey White. If you were here for our first session, this is the same team. So we're happy to have you here and excited to dive deeper into social media and Twitter. Next slide, please. I'll also start my video. Great. So sorry, my video is being a little slow, but hopefully it pops up soon. But as we've gone over before in our other two, there we go. As we've gone over before in our other two sessions, these are our learning objectives for the entire series. We won't read through these, but on the next slide, we have our learning objectives for today's series, specifically on Twitter. What we'll be going through today is describing the various professional uses of social media, specifically Twitter, identify the characteristics of a compelling, well-structured tweet. Sorry, I think we need to mute someone's line, perhaps. Thank you. We'll also learn how to tweet or post on social media according to your goals as a researcher. And we will learn how and understand social media analytics and how data can be used to inform content development. Next slide, please. Before we dive in, we'll start another poll, and I'll pull that up right now. The question is, how confident are you in your ability to tweet professionally? 10 being that you feel like an expert tweeter, you know everything there is to know about what should go in a tweet and how to tweet, and 1 being you're completely new. Give you about 15 more seconds to vote. Great. All right, I'll share them really quickly. Again, we're very much across the board, which I love to see. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll dive right in. So in 2020, just about half of the world's population are active users of social media. That's about 3.8 billion of us. This is an ever increasing statistic that shows absolutely no signs of slowing down. The incredible reach and impact of social media specifically cannot be overstated. More people are getting online every day, even in resource limited settings. Those that might not fully understand the sheer breadth of social media may believe that this is all just a phase. Social media might be a phase, a product of the times that will be replaced one day, but that couldn't be further from what the data tell us. Social media is in a constant state of change and growth itself to satisfy the wants and needs of people living in a global society that thrives on connection, especially now, both on and offline. Next slide. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention COVID-19 here, and specifically the impact that the pandemic has had thus far on phone use and social media use. This right here is data from April of this year. It is definitely worth mentioning that more people are now spending time on their phones and on their social platforms. I know I am a victim of this. More than ever, as we all deal with varying degrees of lockdowns, stay-at-home orders, and social or physical distancing. This time we are living in is presenting a unique opportunity for social media use and for promoting our work. Next slide. So why focus on Twitter specifically? Truthfully, there is a time and place and use for most social media platforms. We focus on Twitter, though, for sharing and disseminating evidence. Oh, sorry, it says my internet connection is unstable, so just bear with me, hopefully nothing happens. But we focus on Twitter for sharing and disseminating evidence precisely for the breadth of its abilities listed here, and its global use and reach for professional networking, policy advocacy, conference coverage. Currently, the AIDS conference is happening, and that's very big on Twitter, and other major international events and conversations. Platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn are also popular and can be used well as supplemental platforms for dissemination. But Twitter is pretty unique in that it is almost impossible to post too much. It is also the platform that is most active, that is hosting the most conversations in terms of global health and development. Simply put, if you're not using Twitter professionally, and regardless of if you are using other platforms professionally, there's a good chance you might be missing out on some major conversations happening in your field of work. Next slide. So I'd love to get a sense of how many of you are actually on Twitter and have your own account. So I'd like you to answer this poll question. Do you have a Twitter account? You'll see we have several answers for yes and no. I'm really interested in seeing if you are using Twitter professionally, personally, for both. There's no right or wrong answer here. And people tend to use Twitter for whatever they feel it serves them best. So just would love to hear your feedback on this. I'll give you guys about 15 more seconds to vote for this. Okay, I'll share the results. So it looks like most of you said yes, and you use it more as a professional platform, or yes, but you're not very active on it. So this session should be very helpful to all of you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what makes a good tweet? I've broken it down into 5 main components here. In a pinch, you may find it helpful to review your drafted tweets before posting them, just using these 5 components as a checklist of sorts. First is language. We now have 280 characters available to us per tweet, which is double what it used to be. But we have to do a lot with just a little. Is your tweet compelling? Some of the examples you'll see later on include leading questions or powerful quotes. Paying attention to language, especially with limited space and characters, is essential. Including a picture or video or infographic of some kind adds tremendous value as well. It's eye-catching, it's colorful, it gets the user's attention. If you attended part 1 of this series on blogging, you'll recall that images are super important aspects of all forms of digital engagement. Hashtags are essentially tags or adding search terms to your tweet. If someone looks for hashtag NTD, they will see that Countdown, as well as others in the NTD space, are actively talking about the subject. Hashtags are also important when attending major international conferences. For example, right now, the conference hashtag for AIDS 2020 is hashtag AIDS 2020 virtual. Sourcing is also important, especially if you're sharing other organizations or projects' resources. When you tag another handle and give credit in the Twitterverse, as we call it, this is essentially a shout out or acknowledgement. And finally, timing. You probably haven't thought much about this, but there are busy times and slow times on Twitter. You want your tweets to be seen during those busy hours when most people are online, so it's important to keep that in mind as well. Next slide, please. And before I go into these details, I just want to mention, feel free to ask questions in the chat box as we go along, and we'll have our Q&A session at the end. So we'll be able to address those. So now to get into the nitty-gritty of these elements, here is a tweet deconstructed. As we go through this, I will repeat some of the concepts I just mentioned in the previous slide, but bear with me as these are really essential to understand before you start tweeting. Here we actually have one of my own tweets, and I use this as an example because it contains all of the elements that are important to be familiar with. So first we have the author name and handle. Next, I want to note the conversational tone that's used. I start with the phrase, "we're back," as it denotes a sense of excitement, which makes the professional content a bit more approachable for an online audience. Third, we have mentions, specifically using DFIDs and Countdown's handles. This is where credit is given where credit is due. This series is hosted by Countdown and more broadly DFID, so it is appropriate to add these here. Fourth, we have a call to action. The reader is invited to view the recording and learn more about the session that is being tweeted about. Fifth, we have a link, the actual resource, and in this case, the recording that the reader can click on. There are a number of free websites that offer shortened links to help you save space in your tweets. I've included the most popular sites for shortening links in our resources slide at the end of this presentation. Next, we have relevant hashtags. Recall that these are essentially search terms. So you want to make sure that the words you put a hashtag in front of are important to the subject. Next, we have tags. You'll see I tagged my fellow presenter, Tori, in this tweet. A really common question is, what is the difference between a mention, like DFID and Countdown above, and a tag? A tag is used when you include a photo and you either want to identify someone in that photo or you want to draw someone's attention to the tweet that you have posted. Sometimes these are used interchangeably, which is okay, but it's nice to be aware of the subtle differences. I just mentioned supplemental images. While it is not required, it is a best practice to include a good quality image wherever possible. It simply takes your tweet to the next level and is likely to increase engagement. The last element I will mention is timing, which I see was a question already. Typically in most time zones, people are more likely to be on Twitter in the early mornings before work, during the lunch hour, and in the early to late afternoon, around 5, 6-ish p.m. Schedule your posts for these times if you want to optimize viewership. Next slide. So we're going to annotate, and if you were here with us for our last 2 sessions, you will be an expert at annotation now. But just as a reminder, at the top of your screen, you will see a view options and you'll be able to click annotate. If we go to the next slide, this annotation feature will be called this or that. And if you go to the next slide after that, these are our instructions moving forward with this activity. So as a group, we're going to review side-by-side examples of tweets. One of the tweets will be a good example, and one of the tweets will be a bad example or a flawed example. So we're going to ask you to please use the stamps feature to vote for the better tweet, and then use the chat box to share your answer to the following question. Why is the tweet you voted for the optimal choice? So if we could go to the next slide, and we'll have you vote on the sides, on the left-hand side for A and on the right-hand side for B. So using the stamps feature, just put your stamp on the left side or right side to denote which one you think is the better tweet. I'll give you about a minute to read these and answer. And then feel free to add comments in the chat box of why you voted for A or B. I see we got some sort of in the middle, leaning A, but great. Yeah, so the winner is tweet A. Most of you got that. And why is it the winner? Well, first of all, as was mentioned in the chat box, tweet B uses way too many hashtags. And essentially the message becomes lost here. The words that are tagged do not necessarily relate directly to the content being shared. For example, we have a hashtag before the word considerations, which could be about anything. We also have a hashtag in front of network and learning and trainings and virtual and approaches. It's a lot. So yes, tweet A is the winner here. If we can go to the next slide. So once again, we'd like you to vote. I'll give you about a minute to read these and put a stamp either on the left side or right side for A or B. All right, yes, the winner is tweet A again. And why is it the winner? Tweet B includes no hashtags, even though there are great search terms we could use here. Tweet B also didn't add handles in front of DFID or countdown. The @ symbol is what I'm talking about. The tweet writer also forgot to add the link. So there are a few things that we would want to change about tweet B here. Moving on to the next. Great comments in the chat as well. So here is a third example. I'll give you about a minute to read and vote using the stamps function. Great. Yeah, so the winner is tweet B here. Tweet A has a bit of a strange tone. Imagine saying this out loud. That's a good indication when you're drafting tweets. Imagine saying it out loud to someone and see if it sounds conversational. Does it sound inviting or friendly? A does not particularly sound inviting or friendly. Tweet A also uses a hashtag COVID-19 with the dash in the middle. While this is the correct way to spell COVID-19, hashtags can only be used with letters and numbers. So a symbol like this dash will essentially break the hashtag, so only COVID in the COVID-19 will be tagged. And that's fine because a lot of people are saying COVID, but just to keep in mind for other words that might have a symbol in the middle, use the and symbol or a dash or anything like that, it will break the hashtag. So keep that in mind. Tweet B is a good reminder that sometimes a short and simple message perfectly does the trick. Yes, and it does, yeah, tweet A does sound a bit condescending. Great, and this is the final example that we'd like you to vote on. These two are a bit different from each other, but they are essentially talking about the same thing and linked to the same thing. And while people are voting on this, I will respond to Kathy's question. She asked, don't you need to use a period before using a mention, the @ symbol, when you start with the mention? So this is a great question because in the past, that has been something you need to do. It's a bit confusing, but if you start a tweet with, you know, at countdown or at NTD countdown, if you begin your tweet with the @ symbol, it used to send a direct private message to the person that you are using the handle. It would not tweet publicly. However, Twitter has recently changed this, so now you do not have to put something before that @ to make it a tweet. And I know this is a bit confusing, but that's a great question, and it recently changed. So before I go on, I want to address Akin's question. Kelly, could you let me know what that question was? I can't see it. More.
Sorry, I was on mute there.
That's fine.
Akin's other query just a little further up, where he's said where he's asked a little bit more for explanation about how about when we use hashtags.
When we use hashtags?
Yeah, when we should use them.
Okay, yeah. So the easiest way for me to think about hashtags is that they are search terms. So, you know, if you're writing a paper and, you know, it's published in a journal and then added to an online resource library, what terms would you want, you know, if people were searching for it, what terms would you assign, search terms would you assign to that paper? So for, you know, an NTD paper, you would probably want to assign NTD, or, you know, since it's probably about countdown work, you'd probably want to use the handle countdown, maybe even a hashtag for it, if that's used. So I like to think about it as, and this example is really good here actually too. And yes, B is the winner, but we have a hashtag for Ghana because the paper is about Ghana. And we have a hashtag for sorry, I've always mispronounced this, schistosomiasis. So we've used hashtags that are really relevant and specific to the content we're talking about. But yes, tweet B is the winner. Tweet A here offers no information about the paper topic or where it's published. It could literally be about anything, and is a bit on the casual side. Tweet B, on the other hand, offers a specific fact from the paper that it's talking about up front so the reader knows exactly what to expect, with the addition of a little teaser to entice the reader to want to learn more. Tweet B also uses specific hashtags, like I just mentioned, that are important to the paper's topic, and tags Bio MedCentral directly, the source of the article. Hopefully that answered your question about hashtags, but we will be going through some more tweets as we move forward. So we can go to the next slide, and I will pass it over to Tori.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I am going to take us through another opportunity to participate. And now we're going to get a little more specific, and it's going to be your chance to share what you've learned up to this point. So we're going to go through some scenarios that should sound pretty familiar to you. Next slide. This section, these next couple slides, we're going to be using annotation again, but we will use the text feature. So go to the select view options at the top of your screen, but this time choose text instead of symbol. And these scenarios are going to build on what we've learned. Your responses will be anonymous, so don't be afraid to share. Next slide. Okay, so our first scenario supposes you did a small study on NTD case management during this time of COVID-19. So let's say you did some phone interviews to find out more about how patients and healthcare workers are dealing with this COVID situation, and how might you tweet about this? You can share an idea for something you might write. You can share hashtags that you would want to include, handles that you would want to include. And if you want to, you can annotate more than once. So go ahead and I'll give you a couple of minutes. Just write what ideas you have. Don't be afraid, and let's jump in. So hopefully no one has any issues finding that text feature to type. COVID-19, yes, obviously that's a great one to include for a hashtag. NTDs.
So it looks like a few people in the chat can't find the function. So it's in the same place where the stamp is that we just used in the view options at the top of your screen. You would click view options, then annotate, and then the text function. And then you click directly on the screen.
Yeah, and if you're still having trouble, you can also type into the text box if you'd prefer to.
Absolutely.
So we have countdown here. Yes, that would be great. Thinking about the last example Aubrey shared, perhaps the country where your research takes place, and I didn't tell you a specific country, so that's probably why it's not up here, but that would be a great hashtag to include. Strategies, health workers coping. Yeah, health workers would be a good hashtag to use. Or if it's a specific type of health worker that you interviewed, you could get a little more specific there. Case management could be also a hashtag. So there's some great ideas here.
Tori, do you mind if I jump in for a moment?
Please do.
I'd like to answer Kathy's question about what's a good way to find out the most commonly used hashtags, and we can all chime in here. I tend to think it's a bit of trial and error. It's just kind of searching, getting familiar with Twitter, using the search box on Twitter and, typing in hashtags, seeing what comes up, seeing who's talking, what handles are talking about those things. So it's a little bit of, you kind of just develop this knowledge over time. But I would recommend when just starting out and trying to figure out what relevant hashtags, especially with things like specific things like LF that you mentioned, Kathy, just start searching with the hashtag in front of various things and see what pops up, and then look at those tweets and see what other hashtags people are using in those tweets, and you'll start to see patterns and you'll start to see what's really popular. But yes, I think it's kind of like something, it's a skill you kind of develop over time, and then you develop this like institutional knowledge of these, what are these most popular hashtags. But yeah, sorry, Tori, back to you.
No, that's really good. Thank you for sharing that, Aubrey. When I got started, I did that as well, and I still do that frequently. It's just searching to see what terms people are using as a hashtag. And it's also a really great way to start following people on Twitter. Once you've identified what hashtags people are using in your field, you'll see who's using them, and you can follow those people, and then you'll start to get some really relevant research and work coming up in your Twitter feed. And it can be a really great professional resource for news. And then those people will also start to follow you when you tweet. And it's exciting to see that happen. It's really fun. So everyone should do that. I really recommend it. Just to wrap up with this scenario, don't forget to mention your partners. This is something that we mentioned earlier, I think, when we talked about giving credit where credit is due. So you'd want to mention Countdown, but also mention any other institutions you collaborated with, even people that you worked with. You can, if they're on Twitter, you can use their handle, or if they're not on Twitter, you can just type their name. But you definitely want to really share about the people that you're working with, and give them the opportunity to weigh in on your tweets and to see how you're highlighting their work. Next slide. Okay, so this one's about publishing a paper. And I think this is a common challenging scenario that we have as researchers. It's sort of asking how do you get started if you have a big paper? It might include a lot of data, different types of analyses in it. You've been working on it for a long time. So in that case, for many of us, we understand how it feels like there's so much that you could share, and you might have a lot of details in your head and you're not sure what would be relevant to people. So this scenario is really, how do you tweet when you've just published a big paper to share your findings? And you can also share strategies or ideas that you have here, as well as hashtags. So it could be something like, break it down into smaller tweets, several tweets. Add key themes, key quotes. That's an excellent idea. Yeah. So I'll give you a couple more minutes for this one. Good suggestions coming up. Wonderful, I love these. Okay, you've hit on some really important things. The title of the paper could be something you include. That would definitely be one tweet you might want to do. I would say definitely for a big paper, you want to tweet about it multiple times. You can tweet about the key findings. You can even have separate tweets on different days about some of the findings. To break it down so it's not too much information that you're trying to cram into one tweet. We acknowledge that you really can't fit in a paper into 280 characters. That's impossible, but you can break it down and share some of your key findings. If, for example, the methods of your work are sort of innovative or different or new, you can share a tweet about the methods, tweet about what's unique about your paper. Like someone just said, that's really what I'm getting at. And definitely, if possible, start ahead of time before you actually have published your paper, just sharing not any findings, but sharing about your work that you're doing in general. and following people in your field so that when you're ready to release that paper and to tweet about it, you'll have followers who are ready to hear about it as well. And I would also just add, use figures if possible from your paper, especially if you have some that are a little bit on the simpler side. Those usually tend to be to lend themselves well to Twitter. But even if you have one that's complex, you can be creative and find a way to describe the most important thing about it. Definitely, it's a great idea to share either an image or a figure directly from your paper. But if you have images from the field, those are good to use as well. Next slide, please. I wanted to give you an example of what this might look like, and also to point out that tweeting about science, one thing that's different about it is that you are, in some cases, targeting sort of a narrower audience. You might be tweeting mostly for people who are in your field, but your tweet should still be accessible and interesting. You would want your friends to read it and be interested in it as well. So this is a tweet by a friend of mine who does rural health research in the US. And I just loved this series of tweets that she published recently about some work that she's been doing. And I think it's really engaging. She picked graphics that are easy to look at and interpret on Twitter. And so even though I'm not a rural health researcher, I was able to understand and really engage with this series of tweets that she put out. And you'll notice she shared a key statistic. She shares the most important takeaway from her graphic. And she has given lots of mentions to her collaborators. So, and link to the paper. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Kelly now.
Okay, thanks, Tori.
Thanks.
Okay, so who will make up your Twitter audience? Who is it that's going to see your post? First and foremost, your followers. When you tweet.
Kelly, I think your audio is low.
Oh no, I had this issue the other day. Bear with me. Is that any better at all? Is it the same?
Not for me, but
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what to do really here. I can try and use a
Your audio is still very faint, Kelly.
I'm just going to try and like attach a headset or something like that. So are there some other slides that we should go through in the meantime while I get sorted?
so Kelly's gonna try to find a headset right now. In the meantime, Corey, do you think you could go over your slides?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. So Sarah, the first slide would be the top 5 keys to success. So we're gonna jump around just a little bit, but that is definitely okay.
Keep me on my toes. Well, first,
there we go. Perfect. Thank you, Sarah.
Let me thank Aubrey and Tori and Kelly for their very interesting and valuable presentation as always. This is a really great resource to have, I think. Just as a reminder, I tweet for FHI 360 research. So some of the things that Tori was just talking about in terms of tweeting for science, there is a way to tweet about science and research and evaluation in a way that's engaging, and while the audience might appear to be limited in some ways, it is still a great way to get information out about your outputs. So let me jump into my keys to success. The first one I want to start with is a little philosophical, I suppose, but I want to encourage you to recognize your power. Don't underestimate the power that you have on social media. If there's anything that I personally have learned in the last few months, whether it's in the United States or otherwise, simple tweets can change the world. I know here we're not talking about changing the world, but my point is you do have the power to draw attention to your paper, to your report, to any type of publication, and ultimately to yourself. So I would encourage you to be bold, consider yourself an army of one, if you will, and just simply don't underestimate your power. So let's run with that, draw attention to yourself. And you do that by being committed to the process, if you will. You'll need to build your audience. I know from the poll at the beginning that 80% of us use Twitter in some way. That's really great. Be committed to using it every day for a certain amount of tweets, or however you want to do it, or a few times a week. Anything is okay. But pledge to participate, post original tweets, engage with others that are tweeting both to you that you have offered, but also engage with tweets that other people have published or other organizations have published. And similarly, I would say when someone engages with you or asks a question, be certain to respond to them. I'll give you a good example. I saw a tweet recently. It was about drug shops, which I think many of us on this call are familiar with. And a general user had said, well, what are drug shops? Which is a very valid question that I even asked myself. Are these pharmacies? What are they? But the point I'm making is there was no answer. So don't just sort of shout into a void. When you tweet something, be willing to engage with questions or comments that other users might have. The third one that I have, be conversational. In my opinion, social media is an informal-ish platform. So don't overthink what a tweet should be. Obviously, be thoughtful about the components of your tweet, but don't worry too much about syntax or grammar. I mean, for me, it's okay if a tweet is less than perfect. I mean, I think we even see that with high-level politicians. That happens. So don't worry too much about it. Just tweet as you speak. The fourth, be strategic. As the other speakers have mentioned, use hashtags. Hashtags are the pound looking, what I call pound hashtag. They are links. They are filters to content that a user can click and quickly sort information or identify that your content is about a certain topic or category of content. And make sure your tweet is accessible. Always use links or an image. To me, that's the most important takeaway. If you want the consumer of your tweet to learn something, more times than not, that requires linking them onward to something. And as you sort of as you bolster your thought leadership, or what you're ultimately doing, and from my perspective, is you want to link them on to your product, to your paper, to your resource, to your organization. So just remember to include that. Sarah, we can go to the next slide. I also wanted to just point out a couple of pitfalls that I have found that it's important to avoid. Well, I can hear you. The first one is avoid an incomplete profile. And what I mean by that is in your Twitter account, make sure that, well, your name is there, obviously. It's great to have a picture. Make sure that your bio is complete. Tell a little bit about yourself. And importantly, there is a field for a web address. Often that is your LinkedIn profile. Sometimes you might have another type of website, but think of your profile as just one component of your online presence. For example, if FHI is tweeting about your paper, or if Countdown is tweeting about your paper, and you have an account, I can tag you in my tweet. A user can click your name, get to your account, and then move onward to your LinkedIn profile, to your research website, or whatever you might have that can tell a user more about you, about your expertise, building your thought leadership and expanding the power that you have on social media. Remember that your tweet should stand alone. And so I guess what I mean by that is make sure that there are appropriate hashtags, that there are appropriate links. If you're live tweeting from an event, make sure you're using the right hashtags, like AIDS 2020, for example, if you're tweeting about that. If you're saying, Dr. Fauci is saying this, or Ambassador Birx is saying this, or your Minister of Health is saying this, without the right context, if someone comes across your tweet later, they're not going to know what you meant or what conversation that was a part of. So just make sure that your tweet has the right context and it can stand by itself a few months from now. I want to speak just for a minute about images. Just make sure that when you are tweeting images as part of your tweet, that you have the right permissions. Often that requires an actual photo release, particularly with study participants. I've seen gross violations of this, even from people who should know better. Obviously, you don't take pictures of study participants and tweet them as part of your conversation unless you have the right permissions, and often that is written permission. Those are sort of just sort of basic ethical considerations that you should consider, and often there are legal implications for that as well. So just make sure you have the right permissions. As Aubrey has talked about at the beginning, I would encourage you to avoid overusing hashtags. A good rule of thumb from my perspective is 3 hashtags per tweet. Otherwise, it gets too crowded, and then the reader is wondering, well, what are the actual keywords here? And also double check what your hashtags, what other people are using that hashtag for. Sometimes a hashtag that really makes sense, no one's using it. So if you use that hashtag, it sort of isn't helpful. So beat NTDs is a good example of that. That is a hashtag that is widely used. It's a nice way to sort NTD content. There may be something like hashtag let's end NTDs that's probably not used anywhere. That makes sense, but it's not going to be helpful. So don't overuse, and double check what your content is. And this sort of goes back to what I had said before, don't leave responses just hanging in the wind. If someone asks a question, engage with them, answer the question. It's also an opportunity to direct them on to other resources that you might want to be directing folks to. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. So we have time for questions. I know we're approaching the end.
Thanks, Corey. So Sarah, if we could go back to the one that starts with audience as the title. And
Can I just
Kelly,
check that you can hear me
Oh,
now?
perfect. Yes.
Sorry about that. Just some technical issues there. Oh, that's great. Thanks for bearing with me. I'll try and get through these slides without rushing, but trying to be quite quick. We might go a few minutes over. But I think we were chatting about if there are any questions that we don't get a chance to address at the end of the webinar, then maybe we can make note of those and send around the answers in a document or something like that if we run out of time. So back to my slides then here. Who will make up your Twitter audience? Who is it that's going to see your posts? First and foremost are going to be your followers. So when you tweet, your posts will appear on the home feed of your followers. This means it's important that you try to have a good number of followers, because the more you have, the more people will see your content. It's difficult to say how many followers a person should aim to have. You can see that on the screen here, it says that Countdown has just over 3,600 followers. We tend to get between 20 and 40 new followers each month, but most individuals' accounts would have a lot less than this, maybe a couple of hundred, but it really does vary person to person. You can increase your number of followers. We already talked a little bit about this earlier on in the webinar, but by tweeting regularly, following accounts, some of these might follow you back, using hashtags and tags to draw others into your tweeting activity and therefore your account. But of course, having the right followers is just as important. If you're going to be tweeting about your work on Countdown, it's a good idea to follow and hopefully be followed back by the right people and accounts. So some suggestions of who to follow: Countdown, of course, and other Countdown partner institution accounts, your colleagues, NGOs, charities and organisations in your field and in the wider health community, other researchers in your field and other fields that you're interested in as well. Once you start to follow more people, Twitter will suggest more profiles in the who to follow section on your homepage, and that gives you a bit of a prompt of who else you might like to follow. Your audience also includes anyone who visits your profile. If you add in tags to your tweets, as we've discussed quite a lot in the webinar, anyone who follows those accounts will be able to see the post that you mentioned them in. The account you mentioned will also get a notification that you've tagged them in a post. And finally, when you use hashtags, anyone searching for that hashtag can see your post as well. Sometimes, as we've talked about, hashtags trend on Twitter. They're very popular, which means lots of people are using the same hashtag. You can use this to gain more views of your tweet. These are also called impressions. By including that trending hashtag in a tweet only if relevant, of course. So, for example, sometimes the hashtag Friday feeling will trend on a Friday. So if I'm putting out any Countdown tweets, I'll include that hashtag there because it gains more attention. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the types of tweets Countdown does. First up, we do a lot of retweets and sharing. In the first example here, we have a simple retweet of us sharing AIM Initiative's post about their event. We also sometimes retweet with a comment. That's the second one there, where we might have something additional to say about the post. We want to put our own comment in or add our own link or just be generally supportive, as you can see in this middle example. And then the final post on the right is, again, a retweet. Sometimes during a live event, such as a webinar or meeting when we're live, there may be others tweeting at the same time, and we can share their posts and they might share ours as well. Next slide, please. So we use Twitter a lot to share Countdown work, such as papers, blogs, policy briefs, and case studies. When we talk about Countdown work, it's important to tag individuals if you have them on Twitter, and also with their organisation if you know it, and the applicable Countdown country account. So we do have Countdown Nigeria, Countdown Liberia, Countdown Ghana and Cameroon, as well as the general countdown account. You can see a tweet about a paper at the bottom there. We try to include the hashtag beat NTDs where we can. We've mentioned that already. And above that, we're sharing a countdown product via someone else's account. Here, this is where Aubrey shared the video of the Digital Engagement Part 2 webinar. And finally, on the right, here's an example of a tweet promoting blogs. We don't always include images such as that. This is a GIF, so it's a moving image. But we developed a couple of simple ones for this countdown blog series that we're currently doing. Notice I also used the COVID-19 hashtag, as this is popular and could bring more traffic to the page. Next slide, please. Some further examples of what we do on the Countdown Twitter account. We share resources relating to NTDs, but sometimes global health in general, and also currently COVID-19, as it is of course a big topic. And we also promote relevant events, for example, upcoming webinars and open meetings. As mentioned, we also sometimes live tweet events too. Next slide. So what are you able to do on Twitter to support us, to support Countdown? Please make sure that you follow Countdown, partners and colleagues on Twitter, and start following relevant organizations. We'd like you to grow your following, to like, share and comment on Countdown posts, and also tag Countdown in your own posts where that's relevant. Next slide, please. So why are we bothered about how much people are engaging with our profile and our content? Well, because of all these things on the screen, they're linking in with one another. So getting likes, comments and shares increases the number of people who view and engage with our tweets. And in turn, the more engagement there is and the more impressions or views, the more likely we are to have an increased amount of likes, comments and shares. So it kind of all goes round and links in together. Whether you're an organization, a business or an individual, you want as many people to be reading about what you have to say as possible. Next slide. And what if we want to find out more about engagement with our Twitter account and our tweets? If you're a numbers person, you may enjoy this part, but if not, please bear with me. So on the home feed screen, if you select more on the left-hand side, you'll see these options pop up, the image on the right of the screen here. If you select analytics, you can use this to look at all aspects of your tweets, and it can help you to identify patterns. For example, which types of tweets evoke the most engagement. Most individual users of Twitter wouldn't use analytics that much, but just to give you a glance. So next slide, please. So on the analytics page here, it gives an overall view of the last 28 days across the top in comparison with the previous 28 days. So it shows number of tweets compared to last month, number of impressions, profile visits, etc. And if you keep scrolling down the page, it gives you highlights, for example, your tweets with the highest numbers of impressions or views. But if you select the tweets option at the top there, circled in red, this will take you to a screen where you can go into more detail with your tweet statistics. You can also select different time frames for viewing the statistics, such as the last 3 months or a particular week in the previous year, if you want to know how many likes, comments, etc. you got within a certain time frame. So analytics for the Countdown Twitter account are important to increase engagement, but also because we do report these to our funder, DFID. And next slide, please. As part of our annual report to DFID this year, we included a 3-page visual document on Countdown website and social media usage. This was the page in a bit for Twitter. There was more to it, but this is just the Twitter section. So there's no need for us to go into detail here, especially as we are time restricted, but we just wanted to show you this to illustrate how in depth you can go with the analytics and looking at the engagement with your Twitter account. So I closely monitor Countdown Twitter usage and analytics, and I collate the figures for reporting to DFID. We're continuously looking to improve our Twitter activity. It is a journey for everybody, myself included. And that's the end of my slides. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And we can skip over these slides because they were Corey's. You already presented them. And then I know we're at the top of the hour. If you can stick around for just 2 more minutes as we close, I am sharing right now in the chat box a link to our final survey. We want everyone to take this final survey. And there's an extra question at the end of this survey that allows you to ask any additional questions from any of the sessions, part 1, part 2, or part 3 that you didn't get to ask, that you might want to ask, more privately. And like Kelly said, we'll work on putting together a document to make sure that we answer all of your questions. So if we can go to the next slide, and you'll see this in the follow-up. We have additional resources here, and you'll get the PowerPoint and the link to the recording as well. And then in the next slide, we just have our, emails and our Twitter accounts. So please, if you're on Twitter, follow us, and we'll follow you back, and we can start working together on Twitter to be more active. And just to follow up again, I will launch our final poll. And this is the same as poll question number 2. We just want to see if you feel, how you feel after this training now. And while you're voting on that, I realize it's a couple minutes after, so I'll be quick. Just another reminder to please take that survey that I just linked in the chat box. It's very quick. It's just like the other 2, and we really appreciate the feedback. And while you continue to vote, I don't know, Sarah, if you can move to the final slide while people are voting. Perfect. Thank you so much. So yes, please complete this survey. A recording of today's session, along with a copy of the slide deck, will be circulated per usual. And that's a wrap for our sessions. We're so appreciative to all of you who joined us and participated in Countdown's Digital Engagement Virtual Training Series. And we believe this is just the beginning. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day.